Imagine you bought and fed your enemy poison, knowing that they would eat and die. Yet after eating the poison, they just grow bigger and much stronger. Well, this was recently the situation in Burkina Faso when France and America attempted to destabilize and topple Captain Ibrahim Traoré. General Langley's accusations during a briefing session of the Senate were designed to isolate, discredit, and pave way to eliminate Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Instead, they've strengthened him. The world is taking notice. From Havana to Copenhagen, one thing is certain. Burkina Faso is no longer on the sidelines. It's stepping into history, and world powers are making U-turns to their earlier decisions. Notably Cuba, Denmark, and Germany. Behind closed doors, Western politicians face an uncomfortable truth they won't say aloud. Africa holds the resources, the markets, and the demographic future. Denmark's foreign minister admitted what many hesitate to acknowledge. Africa's geopolitical relevance and importance in international politics has never been greater. In 2050, 1 in every 4 people in the world will live in Africa. This isn't just demographic forecasting, it's a recognition of shifting power. For years, Western narratives portrayed Africa as dependent, a continent unable to stand on its own. But if that were truly the case, why the panic over Russia and China's growing influence? Why the urgency to re-establish diplomatic footprints after threatening withdrawal? The question now isn't whether Europe can win Africa back. It's whether Africa still wants what Europe and the United States offers. Traoré walks in the footsteps of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader often called Africa's Che Guevara. He openly declared that Burkina Faso would choose its own allies, including those considered enemies of the West. This defiance ultimately cost him his life in a 1987 coup, widely believed to have been backed by foreign interests. Today, Traoré continues this legacy, emerging with strengthened domestic support and increased international legitimacy. Like Sankara, Traoré isn't just charismatic, he's defiant. Cuba's support for Burkina Faso never comes as a surprise. Since time in history, Sankara viewed Cuba not as a distant ally, but as a brother in arms in the global fight for dignity, justice, and sovereignty. Unlike Denmark or Germany, Cuba never turned its back on Burkina Faso. The relationship between these nations is rooted in decades of revolutionary solidarity. When the coup failed, Cuba didn't hesitate. Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez flew to Ouagadougou to meet directly with Traoré. During his visit, Rodriguez didn't just speak of current affairs. He invoked the legendary bond between Thomas Sankara and Cuban revolutionaries Fidel and Raúl Castro. This wasn't merely rhetoric. It was a torch being passed down. Let's now talk about Denmark's U-turn. In August 2024, Denmark announced the closure of its embassies in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. The official explanation cited military coups and limited scope for action in the Sahel region. But beneath this diplomatic language lay a different motivation: Western discomfort with these nations' pivot toward Russia, China, and other Eastern powers. The embassy closures were never about safety or logistics. They were a political response to a continent pivoting eastward, to Russia, to China, to sovereignty. Denmark thought its decision would pressure Traoré to reconsider his alignment with Russia and return to Western influence. They miscalculated. Months later, Denmark's embassy in Ouagadougou remains open. Not only that, just 1 week after the attempted overthrow of Traoré, Danish Special Representative Nygaard Marison and Ambassador Christian Kierkegaard Attinger met with Burkina Faso's Prime Minister. Marison made Denmark's position unmistakably clear. Denmark respects the sovereign decisions of each country. We are a small country that also makes sovereign decisions. A rare moment of diplomatic humility from a Western nation. For Germany, the case is almost the same as Denmark. Initially, Germany followed France's lead in condemning Traoré. However, a recent visit by the Economic Development Minister, Svenja Schulz's visit to Ouagadougou, marks another diplomatic pivot. While reaffirming Germany's preference for democratic systems, she made a striking admission. Most people in the world live under non-democratic governments, and Germany has no choice but to deal with that reality. In other words, Traoré didn't change, Germany did. Her candid assessment revealed the calculation behind the shift. If Germany pulled out of the Sahel, others would fill the vacuum. with others clearly referring to Russia. What once sounded like moral positioning now appears as strategic necessity. What's remarkable is how quickly Western nations are adjusting their tone, not because Traoré compromised, but because he refused to. History teaches us sovereignty is not given, it's taken. Look at the contrast between different African leadership approaches. Some leaders eagerly volunteer troops to serve Western interests, responding like children desperate for validation from distant parents. Meanwhile, Traoré has made one thing abundantly clear. He will only be treated as an equal, and anyone who refuses will be ignored. This is the essence of strong leadership, not chasing validation from global powers, but standing firm on principle. Traoré has shown the world that sovereignty is not something to be begged for, it's something to be enforced. For too long, the African continent has been led by men who sold their nation's futures for briefcases of Western money and promises of political power. The West learned the pattern. Apply pressure, offer rewards, and watch the leaders fold. But Traoré broke the pattern. His strength, clarity, and refusal to compromise have forced even Western powers to shift their tone. U.S. military officials have described him and the AES leadership as sophisticated because they know they're not dealing with puppets. They're facing sovereign leaders. The growing support for President Traoré reveals something deeper, something that African history has rarely allowed us to witness, that African leaders can command global respect not through submission, but through service to their people. What's emerging is a new model of international engagement, one where African nations aren't passive recipients of aid or instructions, but active shapers of their own destiny. Western nations are being forced to abandon condescension in favor of respect, while traditional allies strengthen bonds through practical cooperation. The old pattern of Western pressure and African acquiescence is breaking down. In its place rises something new, a diplomacy of equals, where sovereignty is not a privilege granted by the powerful, but a right defended by the principled. Cuba and Burkina Faso may be worlds apart on the map, but they share a common bond, a relentless struggle against Western domination. Like Burkina Faso, Cuba has stood its ground, refusing to bow to imperial pressure. What binds these nations isn't just shared hardship, it's shared conviction. This is the lesson that must echo across every capital on the continent. Sovereignty is not requested, it's asserted. Traoré didn't ask for permission to lead his people. He earned their loyalty, and through that loyalty, he gained power that no foreign influence could ever grant. The world is watching, and Africa is rising. Not through begging, but through standing firm. Not through compliance, but through courage. And under leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, not as subordinates in someone else's story, but as authors of their own. Burkina Faso under Traoré isn't just surviving, it's showing a path forward. A path where African nations determine their own futures, choose their own allies, and command the respect they've always deserved. In a world where rules are often written by empires, Traoré reminds us that true sovereignty isn't granted. It's taken, defended, and paid for in full. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping the African spirit alive. Till we meet again, long live Africa.